Well, here we be again for another good old episode. This is the official review for the so-called best-selling novella White Trash. Uh, I have put together this real elaborate scheme as how I was going to present this, but I don't want to have issues while I'm streaming this, and I didn't not want to live stream while I presented the book because it's very important, that people get to see the exact happenings with, actually within the book as it's happening. Uh, this is probably going to be a two-part review, more than likely. I don't want to rush myself through the review. I just want to get you guys acquainted with the materials within the book so that way when I present the Eskimo Joe thing, because I'm going to start to drop all that little piece by piece. I got most of the Eskimo Joe done, but this in particular review is going to support all the black in the world. It is imperative that I point out specifically when this young lady is talking about um, Negroes from so-called Africa, then blacks that are running around in America, then the other African mongrels, as she'll put in the book herself, as she says. And once again, the author of this book is a Miss Nancy Isenberg. Um, there's a lot of people who were like, well, what's that got to do with this? And what's that got to do with that? And there's a lot that actually falls within it. Like, for example, the very first chapter is chapter 1, obviously, and it's taking out the trash. Now, in this chapter in particular, the exploits of several men, many of whom actually never sailed to America, actually set foot on American soil themselves. They were what's the word I'm looking for? They were pioneers of thought. That's a really good way to word what they were. They were pioneers of thought. And here we go, very first part. So in each chapter, let me see if I can't get this kind of close on the screen. But in each chapter, there's a quote that starts it. For example, and it says this: taking out the trash, waste people in the new world. And it says colonies ought to be emunctories or sinks of states to drain away the filth. This is John White in 1630, the Planter's Plea. Now, while this seems like it's not a big deal, it's a huge deal. For example, as it starts, she pretty much comes right in and says what I just said. In the minds of literate English men and women, as colonization began in the 1500s, North America was an uncertain world inhabited by monstrous creatures. Okay, a, a blank territory skirted by mountains of gold because it was strange land that few would ever see firsthand. Spectacular tales had more appeal than practical observation. England's two chief promoters of America's exploration would never set foot on the continent. Richard Hakluyt, the elder, was a Middle Temple vibrant center of intellectual life and court politics in London, and he was from 1530 to 1591. And his much younger cousin with the identical name, who was also Richard Hakluyt, 1552 to 1616, was trained at Christ Church and Oxford, and were never hazarded voyages beyond, and never hazarded a voyage beyond the shores of France. So right there, we're just gonna stop and just elaborate, on the fact that once again, I wanted to do this to really lambaste the lady and to prove my point, but there's nothing to prove. as far as how racist the writer of this book is. Um, this chapter. Let me see if I have any bookmarks in it. Oh, this is perfect. Page 25 of chapter 1, because the book starts on page, argue page like 16 or something like that, and then so actually page 9 would be, is like page 25. But just listen to this. Here we go. So Jamestown, just in case you guys really don't understand, like Jamestown was horrible. Jamestown was completely, absolutely horrible for settlers. But there was a spot called in Georgia, I want to say. It's called. Let me find the name of the actual place. I'm not going to give you the wrong name, but a Sir, what is his name? A Sir Walter Raleigh's, and it was like a Roanoke or Roanoke or something like that. But it was a failed trial territory, and the major reason for this is why I'm saying that it's failed and that it didn't work is because massive, when I say massive, cannibalism set in. Uh, let me just see. Okay, page 18, and here we go. In Heiclet's English colonial vision, distant America was a wilderness of an almost inconceivable dimension, meaning that it was vast in size. For the French intellectual Michael de Montaigne in 1580, it was a habitat of simple and uncorrupted people, whom he whimsically called cannibals. Wow. They're totally harmless, but he's calling them cannibals. I want y'all to really understand the notions that they're making here about the people that live in the land. These are important because certain notions are used later, are branded against people later that actually are undeserving. Now, mind you, when I first read to you, they are all already calling the people who inhabited the land monstrous creatures, people who hadn't even been here. Okay. So once again, already the dehumanizing, this is what I've been talking about the whole time. The dehumanizing of other humans was their when I say that was the first, second, third, fourth, and fifth plan to first dehumanize everyone, that was their plan. Listen to this. This is crazy. Like Heiclet, he'd never seen native people, of course. Heiclet at least was more practical and more Anglican than Montaigne in his outlook on the Aboriginals. Now, notice she's calling what some people consider the Native Americans Aboriginals. No, because these are Black people. Okay? These are a Black-like people. And I have to slowly do the review like this because I know a lot of you probably didn't get to my other channel, Love Is Not a Game, and watch the the uh the review for her, her Q&A for her own book. Now, once again, chapter 1 is simply about them moving from the land of England, the Isles, and then establishing America as a place that's even formidable to stay. But I'm just wanting to point out to you that they had already started the dehumanizing process of the humans that were living on the land, these dark-skinned people. Some of them with straight hair, with dark skin. Can you dig it? I'm gonna show you guys a picture in a little bit, and but first I'm gonna read this quote, and I mean it's huge. Here we go. Here we go. Back to page 25. This is crazy. I mean, I really can't believe that it's like this. Here we go. Page 25, second paragraph in. There were few lusty men in Virginia, to repeat Hayclett's colorful term. It remained difficult to find recruits who would go out and fell trees, build houses, improve the land, fish, and hunt wild game. Hear this, the men of early Jamestown were predisposed to play cards, to trade with vile sailors, and to rape Indian women. A glass blower was sent to make colored beads, trinkets to sell Indians. This was Hayclett's idea. But where were the husbandmen needed to raise food? Husbandmen are people who can tend to the land. Now listen, and practically bad decisions and failed recruitment strategies left the colony with too few plowmen and husbandmen to tend the fields and feed the cattle that were being shipped from England. Now stop right there. We're going to go ahead and go forward now. We're out of chapter 1. We're going to get out of chapter 1, okay? Because we're not going to go into women owning land, coming into owning land, marrying multiple men. We're not even going to worry about that. We're going to start to slowly work our way into the excuses made for the white people. See, and the slave, you understand, is a means of a crutch for the early settler, for the early colonizers. The means of a crutch, as you just heard in the book say, that they were predisposed to wanting to play cards, gamble, drink, and rape the native Indian women. Now, did she call them aboriginals? No, she did not. Understand, language is everything. Language is everything. And a part in the preface, and I'm going to read it really, really quickly to you. She uses the word pundit to describe what's the word? People who she felt in her mind, couldn't actually prove it, but she felt in her mind were no longer valuable means of a source of a view. Hold on one moment. So we are in the preface, and I just want to find where she smashes. And the reason why it's so important is because she uses the word pundit, right? But she goes on later on to call the man who was in the movie, excuse me, Deliverance. She goes on to call the young man, the character that he plays in the book, an idiot savant. Now, what's so important about the word savant is that if you look up the word pundit, the original word is pandant. It's a derivative, and one of the synonyms outside of the word maven or expert is the word savant. So not only does she use words that have synonyms that she uses to insult somebody earlier, she uses a word that can be used in place of a word, which is the word pundit, and she goes on to I don't know, make the word seem as if it's not that bad. Right now, I'm not being able to find the page. I thought I had it bookmarked, but that's not important. What is important is this, what I'm about to read to you. 1 second. Here we are. Friends and colleagues have helped this book along in crucial ways. I wish to thank those who read chapters, gave suggestions, or sent along sources. Chris Tomlins, Alex Miscrossan, Liz Varon, Matt Dennis, Lizzie Race, Amy Greenberg, and my LSU colleague, Aaron Sheehan-Dean. Lisa Francavilla, managing editor of the Papers of Jefferson, retirement series, Charlottesville, Virginia, called my attention to a valuable letter. Charles Roberts graciously shared with me a crucial newspaper article on the resettlement community of Palmerdale, Alabama. My Viking editor, Wendy Wolf, with roots in New Orleans, was instrumental in tightening the argument and policing the prose. I'm pretty sure that has to mean with like politicizing the point. Wendy put up an extraordinary amount of time, skill, and care into the manuscript. Her thoughtful editing has taken a complex history and made it far more reader friendly. Listen, I told y'all this is one of the hardest books I ever read. And she's saying that this lady made it more reader friendly. Imagine how grotesque the book was. One moment. Most of all, listen, I have to thank Andy Bernstein, my dearest confidant and fellow historian, whose critical eye made this a much better book. Now, why that is so important, because during her Q&A with the C-SPAN, they never bring up Andy Bernstein. The fact that he's written every book that she's wrote, he's been a part of it. They don't even bring this man up. And I've argued that this is his book many times, and I'll continue to argue that this is his book. Chapter 2 starts with a quote like this. John Locke's Lumberland, the settlements of Carolina and Virginia. Surely there is no place in the world where the inhabitants live with less labor than in North Carolina. It approached nearer to the description of Lumberland than any other by great felicity of climate and the easiness of raising provisions and the slothfulness of the people. William Byrd II, History of the Dividing Line, in 1728. Now, another thing I need you guys to keep in mind is there's a lot of jumping around from different points in history to support other points. So sometimes she goes 100 years, 20 years, just a couple years forward, or sometimes she literally changes from one diaspora to the next to try to support her points, which 1785 can't support 1581. There's no tying together the historical balance there. Each of the colonies has their own unique and keen history. As a historian, she doesn't point this out. However, we're not worried about that. We're worried about things like Thomas Jefferson saying stuff like life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Which Thomas Jefferson got from John Locke, from Life, Liberty, and the State. The whole reason for this is that I'm just going to look for a couple pages where it speaks specifically as to the land had been taken from all the poor settlers who she's calling waste people the entire time. So I don't understand, are they waste people or are they not? You see what I'm saying? Like if they were never supposed to have anything, I don't see the problem with them not having anything now. If they were sent here with the ability to being able to change their condition and they didn't change their condition, that's their fault. It's nobody else's fault but their own. It can be no one else's fault but their own. However, so poor Virginians, this is page 46, this is crazy. Poor Virginians threatened to drag down the entire colony. Shaftesbury, too, believed that everything should be done to discourage lazy or debauched men and their families from settling in Carolina. The proprietors definitely did not want a colony overrun with former indentured servants. They did not want Virginia's refuse, meaning their waste people. In their grand scheme, leap men were intended to take the place of those who lived off the land without contributing to coffers of the ruling elite. Serfs, in short, were better than those lazy lubbers, meaning stupid, clumsy oafs. Wow. The word that came to describe the vagrant poor of Carolina. Now, here we go. This is huge. They didn't want the people to just be able to come from one spot. Listen, they were just indentured servants. These white people were just servants to other white people, right? They saw other white people never doing anything. I want y'all to understand, when they're calling the white people lazy, they're calling them lazy because these are white people who are watching other white people with slaves never do a damn thing, and then have the nerve to tell them that they have to work. And they're like, this motherfucker looks just like me. Why aren't they doing anything? Why do I have to work and they don't? So this idea of the leap men was to discourage the people from being lazy, and it was to help improve land development. There's another part about North Carolina. South Carolina did much better than North Carolina initially. North Carolina, which came to be known as Poor Carolina, went in a very different direction from its sibling to the south. It failed to shore up its elite planter class. Now, the reason why they failed to do something like that. One second. One moment. Let me find it. Where it speaks that North Carolina is the mainly a here we go. It's right here. North Carolina's physical terrain was crucial in shaping the character of its people. Along with the boundary between Virginia and Carolina was a large and forbidding wetland known as the Dismal Swamp. The word swamp was derived from the Lower German and Dutch, though it was first used by English settlers in Virginia and New England. Dismal, on the other hand, conjured the superstitious lore of medieval times. The word was associated with cursed days, Egyptian plagues, sinister spots, and inauspicious omens. For William Shakespeare, it evoked a Netherland, as in dark, dismal, dreaming night. Virginians viewed the 2,200 square mile wetland as a danger-filled transitional zone. The seemingly endless quagmire literally overlapped the two colonies. There were no obvious routes through its mosquito-ridden cypress forest. In many places, travelers sank knees deep in soddy, peaty soil, and had to wade through cold-colored, slimy waters dotted with gnarled roots. Little sunshine penetrated the dismal swamp trees and thickets, and the air gave off noxious fumes, which were colorfully described as noisome exhalations, arising from a vast body of mire and nastiness. This statement comes from a travel log of a wealthy Virginian, William Byrd II. Now, understand why that's so important. This is a rich-ass dude, right, who came from a place like England, okay, where there's already cities at and everything. His mind of what a land should look like is totally convoluted, y'all. People left England not just because they were poor and they were downtrodden. There was no space. There was no space to build and expand anymore. So filth and corruption is what obviously overran England. However, thus, he was the first of many writers to draw a jaded portrait of the swampy origins of white trash rural life. Now, why do they have to be white trash? Because they live in Carolina. And if y'all know anything about Carolina, Carolina has extremely fertile lands in certain places. Once again, why couldn't these people, these capable husbandmen, if they were such, till the land? We're going to move forward real quick to one of my first bookmarks, and it goes back to one of the things I've read to you guys before about pork. But this is gonna really touch you though. Here we go. This is page 53, last paragraph. When Byrd identified the Carolinas as residents of Lubberland, he drew upon a familiar English folktale that featured one Lawrence Lazy, born in the country of Sloth, near the town of Neverwork. Lawrence was a heavy lump who sat in his chimney corner and dreamt. His dog was so lazy that he lied with his head against the wall to bark. In Loverland, sloth was contagious, and Lawrence had the power to put all masters under his spell, so they fell into a deep slumber. As applied to the rural poor who closed themselves off to the world around them, the metaphor of sleep suggested popular resistance to colonial rule. Byrd found the people he encountered in Carolina to be resistant to all form of government. Everyone does what seems best in his own eyes. As he further contemplated the source of idleness, Byrd was convinced that it was in the lubber's blood. Living near the swamp, they suffered from distempers of laziness, which made them slothful and everything but getting children. They displayed a cadaverous complexion. Now stop. A cadaverous, plain and pale skin that I don't know what. We're going to break into people looking different than that later on. We're going to break into why weren't these guys eating dirt and stuff like that? Why wasn't hookworm and pellagra a problem for the earliest settlers and then one for later ones? Anyway, we're just going to just keep reading. My goodness. The combination of climate and an unhealthy diet doomed them. Eating swine, they contracted the yas, and their symptoms matched those of syphilis. They lost their noses and palates and had hideously deformed faces. With their flat noses, they not only looked like, but also began to act like wild boars. Many of them seemed to grunt rather than speak. In a perseverous country, people spent their days foraging and fornicating. When upset, they could be heard yelling out, "Flesh alive and tear it." It was their favorite exclamation, Byrd said. This bizarre colloquialism suggested cannibalism or perhaps hyenas surrounding a fresh kill and devouring it. How could these cavernous swamp monsters be thought of as English? Now, once again, now they're not talking about uh uh they're not talking about the natives. How I know they're not talking about the natives? Because here we go. Byrd had few practical ideas for reforming God-forsaken wilderness he had explored. Only drastic measures would work. Replacing lubbers with Swiss German settlers and draining the swamp of its vile, murky waters. He mused that colonization would have been better outcome. Listen, he's not musing, he was dead ass serious. If male settlers had been encouraged to intermarry with Indian women over 2 generations, the Indian stock would have improved as species or flower or tree might. Dark skin blanched white. Heathen ways dimmed. Listen, when they say dark skin, she's talking about black Indians right now. Okay? Black Indians. She's talking about people who look like this. Hold on. Now I got to share the screen. I've been waiting to do this. 1 second. I have been waiting to do just this. One moment. Yeah, because when she says black, when she says dark-skinned Indian, and I mean, really, I'm not gonna say it's just hella deceptive, but man, I mean, it borders like I really feel as if she attempted on purpose to not tell the truth. I'm gonna pull up this picture of some beautiful black women who are not our people with long straight hair. One moment. Bam. Share. Look at these beautiful women. Look at them. Look at their faces. I was talking to Roger Spice. I'm going to touch on something real quick. Is it more likely that women who had straight hair that were black are the reason why other black women with not straight hair began to wanting to perm and straighten their hair? Or do you really believe they wanted to be like white women? That's just a question I want y'all to ask yourselves. You don't need to answer that right now. But look at these women. Are they not dark-skinned? Would their children not look whitish if mated with white men? Yes, they would. In 2 generations, they would look almost completely white. 3 generations totally washed out. However, things like that, things just like that, are what we're reading about within this book. Now, you might not feel like this is a real review. No, this is a review. This is a real review, okay? Where we take the time to actually go over what she's talking about. Now, it says right here, Bird borrowing from the author, Arthur Johnson, who wrote in A New Voice to Carolina that men of lower rank gain an economic advantage by marrying Native women who brought land to the Union. Are you hearing that? So they're saying that by him getting with the Native American woman, he would automatically gain whatever land that her people lived on. Are y'all hearing this? This is how corrupt they are. Now, is she talking about how they use manifest destiny to come and take everybody's shit? No, she's not. The author of this book will tell you that she doesn't believe in fate. Ironic. Very ironic. Here we go. Here we go. Let's just skip to the next one, the next bookmark that I have. All right. This is huge. Along with white people being extremely lazy, as I pointed out one time with Benjamin Franklin, I'm going to push something upon you guys. And this is about people who were moving to Georgia. Is it William Oglethorpe? I can't think of this guy's first name, but she calls him Oglethorpe, but I'm pretty sure it's William. And anyway, he moved people from the northern colonies to Georgia, and Georgia was the first place where they tried to not practice slavery. The reason because is they were so close to some of the Spanish colonies that they didn't want to encourage the slaves to run away. But a larger reason was that white people, I think, were curious to see if other white people were just this damn lazy, or if it was the actual presence of black slaves that actually made them not want to work. So listen to this. Oglethorpe, unmoved by their demands, and their demands were that he allowed them to practice slavery within Georgia. Just as he had earlier called press gangs were people who used to round up guys who were poor in England and force them into labor, as into being laborers for the Navy, or being people that they would go and force to do like really, really hard labor. Here we go. He called press gangs little tyrants with great sticks when they forcibly turned poor men into sailors. Now he charged that Georgians who fled to South Carolina preferred whipping Negroes to regular work. Oglethorpe pointed to those settlers who were not afraid of labor, who knew how to subsist comfortably without clamoring for slaves. They were Scottish Highlanders and German settlers. Listen to me. They were Scottish and German. Did you hear that? Oglethorpe felt that these folks were hardier and their predisposition to work was superior to that of Englishmen. Now, the reason why this is so crazy is because this same woman tries to claim many times that these men were put on land or gained land that was totally uninhabitable, was totally you couldn't morph the land. You know what I'm saying? Totally dead land. That's too easy to say when obviously everybody around them is an English person. But when they included the Scottish and the German, you see, that was no longer the issue. People who came from much more harsher climates within Europe. And at that point in time, their countries weren't nearly as developed as, let's say, in England or a Spain or even a France, who were all world powers that I just mentioned. And because of such, one has to consider that these people are just, they're different. Okay, we all know that white people look alike, but there's black people that look alike that do things totally different. So what she's trying to point out again is that these people were here that were white people who were supposed to be so-called husbandmen. Husbandry is gardening. Okay, that's how you transform the land from nothing to something. And these men were never that. Once again, if I started it with sharing with y'all how they were predisposed to wanting to play guards, gamble, and rape women, the native women at that. Now, if you were watching just a moment ago when I brought up that picture of those very beautiful women, right, with long straight hair, which I would contend why black women to this day want to have straight hair, and where they initially got the idea from are the same people that they wanted the white man to blood mix with because they already have straight hair. So their offspring already look more white than not. They already have a lot of white features than not. And what it would have done, like they said, is it would have given them land. Now, what that means is that some of these natives that they were dealing with were within matriarchal systems, okay, or systems that practice certain forms of matriarchy where the woman actually does own land. Understand me. This is huge, and the reason why I draw the line here as to why this guy Oglethorpe would compare press gangs to lazy Carolinians who preferred whipping Negroes. Once again, these are people who don't want to turn the land. They're overseers. They were overseers for the plantations, right? So, how many real white trash people were actually looking face to face at black slaves working right across from them? I want y'all to really think about that. When we hear terms that later on that I might get to in this part of the review, like I said, it's going to be several parts. Um, it was supposedly a 300 page novel. Realistically, it's like 280. Um, with a bunch of like index cliff notes to go and like check out the credibility of her work. However, we're not even going to. We won't continue on with that. 1 second. Let's go on with Oglethorpe again. At the second to last paragraph on page 60. He did not imagine his colony as a multiracial colony, nor did he surmount common prejudice with respect to Africans. He permitted there be a small number of Indian slaves in this colony. Listen, 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 listen. Why would they draw a line between respects to Africans and then go right to the number of Indian slaves in his colony? Understand, they're using these words synonymously. She used the word just then in a synonymous gesture. Okay, she for her to say uh, 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 nor did he surmount common prejudices with respect to Africans. He permitted there to be a small number of Indian slaves in his colony. It means specifically that those Indians that she's speaking on in particular were dark skinned and were synonymously called Africans more than likely. Moving forward, he permitted there be his plan was centered on class. He restricted slavery principally because he believed it would shift the balance of power in Georgia and starve the poor white laborer. Do you get it? Do you get it? What it's saying is that it would make poor white laborers who were already let me think. Let me think. His plan is to bring people who want to work for the land, not people who want to have slaves or work for people who already have their own slaves. So he wants people who want to be a slave for themselves, not a slave for a person with their own slaves. Because that's why they were starving, because they're working under somebody else and not for themselves. They had no real vested self-interest to want to make things better for themselves. However, that's just my interpretation of as to why he didn't want slaves there. In the larger scheme of things, his reform philosophy recognized that weak and desperate men could be led to choose a path that dictated against their own interest. A man might sell his land for a glass of rum. Are you hearing that? A man might sell his land for a glass of rum. Debt and idleness were always a temptation. So another thing what it's saying is that if he has to actually work on the land and there's not slaves here, he's not going to be tempted to just sell it for next to nothing. And that's what these guys were doing. Are y'all hearing that? These dudes are coming here and giving up their land for a glass of rum. And yet they have the audacity to blame you. Blame you, black people, for why they have nothing. Here we go. So here's another one for you. Georgia instituted a policy of keeping the land tail male, meaning the oldest male. Many settlers, and I'm skipping all over the place. Many settlers disliked the practice. Hardworking families worried about the fate of unmarried daughters who might be left with nothing. Now listen to this. One such complaint from Reverend Dumont, a leader of French Protestants interested in migrating to Georgia. What happened to widows? Too old to marry or beget children, he asked. And how could daughters survive, especially those unfit for marriage, either by sickness or evil construction of their body? Now, what this man is saying is that this plan doesn't work if I only have daughters who can't get married because somebody doesn't want to marry them. Then she dies and then the land goes back to the government. That's why they didn't like that. You see what I'm saying? That was the real issue with that. The other issue with it is that certain people felt like they were stuck to the land. How do you feel stuck to land that's going to be yours? Do you understand? These people were living in the moment. They had no idea. They had no idea of longevity. They weren't taught longevity. These are once again the waste people of of the English colonies. So there's no way that they know anything. There's no way. Yeah, give me 1 second, Apple Yazai. I got you, bro. Steve, what's up, Cuddy? I'll get the link in there right now, bro. I'm just now looking at the page. One moment. Links down. Invite. Copy. Close. So anyway, like I was saying though, I want to read something about once again, this book is supposed to be a justification as to why white people don't have anything, right? As supposed to be why these same white people back then were so disadvantaged. But right now, all you're hearing about is lazy ass people who saw other white people with land and slaves and wanted their own land and slaves. And because they couldn't have that, they bucked against the system that other white people tried to establish. This is what you're hearing about. We're hearing about them bucking their own system and trying to make themselves seem different because one of them has money and the other one doesn't. When in fact, the reason for the separation from those other white people and attempting to dehumanize them is so that way they're not seen as the same people. When in fact, once again, they are the same people. Here we go. German Lutherans who established the community in 1734 also saw the dangers of Georgia becoming like South Carolina. Without encouragement from Oglethorpe, Reverend Bolzius of the contingent observed that a common white laborer in Charlestown earned no greater wage than a Negro. Africans were encouraged to breed like animals, and slave owners would do everything possible to increase their stock. Merchants and other gentlemen hoarded the best land near the coast and along the commercial rivers. Poorer men were forced to possess remote and less desirable land. Remote and less desirable doesn't mean that it can't be turned over and utilized into plush, good land. South Carolina was a poor white family's worst nightmare. How? When before South Carolina was the place to be over North Carolina. And North Carolina was the worst place to be for poor white people. Do y'all understand the issues with this is what she wrote in her own book. once again, this is going to take a little while. I'm going to work through another few chapters, and this is going to be a 3-part. Yeah, this is going to be a 3-part thing. I can see it already. Because I want to do some more stuff about all the black in the world. I don't want to just focus on this, but listen to this, man. This is how deep it was. Because Oglethorpe didn't want people to own slaves, right? They said in 1743, he left the colony, never to return. 3 years earlier, a soldier had attempted to murder him, the musket ball tearing through his wig. He survived, but his dream for Georgia died. Over the next decade, land tenure policies were lifted, rum was allowed to flow freely, and slaves were sold surreptitiously over and over and over. In 1750, settlers were formally granted the right to own slaves. So 7 years after Oglethorpe left, they were granted the right to own slaves. Understand, they ran Oglethorpe out of the place so that way they could own slaves because they did not want to own slaves. They want to be just like everybody else. Understand this. If they were really worth a fuck, these are white people, all kinds of white people. These weren't just Englishmen who tried to run them off. These were Germans and Swiss and all of them too. Okay, the French and all of them too. The Spaniards and all of them too. These people were they all had a natural predisposition to wanting to own the black man. Now, did all of them own slaves? No. Were there tenant farmers or were there people who owned land who owned no slaves? I'm sure there were. But that number of people compared to the number of people who probably had 5 or 6 slaves is so much smaller. Most people own slaves. That's something, most people didn't own a lot of slaves, but most people own slaves. So for a person to try to tell you that they didn't, highly disrespectful. Highly disrespectful. I can't wait till we get to this part about mulattoes. That is the whole part about this whole book. She destroys her, to me, she destroyed her own book by doing so. Here we go. A planter elite quickly formed, principally among transplants from the West Indies and South Carolina. By 1788, Carolinian Jonathan Byron was the most powerful man in Georgia with 32,000 acres and 250 slaves. He set up shop there in 1750, and the very year slavery was made legal, his numerous slaves entitled him to large tracts of land. Now listen to this. That's since 1788 he had 250 slaves. You think those slaves stopped making babies or weren't encouraged to make more babies? You think that's all the slaves he had, or that's the number of slaves he was willing to acquiesce that he had? Understand this. There's no way that they're going to tell me that people were encouraging slaves to breed like rabbits, okay? And then they also were in like these super duper small numbers. The two things don't line up. They don't make sense at all. Regardless if the slave is an Aboriginal, a Native American, which they are different, even though they're both Aboriginals, or the other kind of Aboriginal Native American, which Eskimo Joe is going to touch on the other different Aboriginal. Here we are. One second. Oglethorpe's ideas did not entirely disappear. Both Benjamin Franklin and Thomas Jefferson agreed that slave owning corrupted whites. The idea of promoting a free white labor buffer zone went into Jefferson's draft of the Northwest Ordinance. This is in 1787, a blueprint for the admission of new states to the Union. So when they were trying to get new states to the Union, they didn't want them to have slavery because they seen what slavery had done to the white man. You see, in a short amount of time, they were able to witness people who maybe a generation ago from their times would have been willing to pick up a shovel, a rake, and do some work with it, and had watched black people slave so hard, had watched white men treat black people as they were nothing for so long that these same people were like, we want to do the same thing. We don't want to work no more. We want to be just like that. Here we go. As Reverend Bolzius had observed, if slaves were encouraged to breed like animals, then poor whites could not produce at the same rate and hold on to their land or their freedom. Why not? Why not? Why couldn't poor whites do that? Why couldn't poor whites breed like animals? It's because of that Rh negative gene, and that's because some of them had came here and already blood mixed with the natives. So some of these guys you're looking at who had white skin are Rh positive. Some of them who came from England are Rh positive because they come from true black stock. I don't even want to get it carried away into that, but the Rh negative, Rh positive thing plays a huge part into why the early European English settlers could not produce a lot of children. I'm quite sure it's not until many of them breed out and then breed back in that they're able to actually produce children because they now have the Rh positive genetic floating around in their body, making them able and compatible with other Rh positive people. Same thing with the Rh negative folks. This is why you always hear white people stressing about they can't be blood mixing. This is really why, because there's a lot of people who get with other races and then they have fertility issues, and they think it's and they're like, and they think that they're not healthy, but it's like, no, your genetics are not compatible. It's that simple. Last part of this. Here we go. All the while, deeply ingrained, English disgust for idleness persisted. The rural poor, though seen as a liability, became an unbanishable part of American experience. Now, how can you call one person idle, but you own slaves and don't do shit yourself? Do y'all understand the hypocrisy in those kinds of words? They don't make any sense. Not only did free laborers exist in contrast to imported African slaves, but they also stood apart from useless white lubbers. Land was the principal source of wealth and remained the true measure of liberty and civic worth. Hereditary law titles may have gradually disappeared, but large land grants and land titles remained central to the American system of privilege. When it came to common impressions of the despised lower class, the new world was not new at all. Okay, this is chapter 3, Benjamin Franklin's American Breed, Demographics of Mediocrity. Can it be a crime, in the nature of things, to add to the number of king subjects in a new country that really wants people? And he's saying, can it be a crime? Hold on. This is huge. To either go here and make a bunch of babies, go here and rape the native populace, go here and enslave the people and make them subjects to the king, right on? Is it really a crime, right? In a new country that really wants people? Once again, do y'all get it? Because they're going to be subject to the king anyway if they're in a country that's under the king's control, right? So, like every educated Englishman, Benjamin was obsessed with idleness. In his Poor Richard's Almanac, 1741, he offered familiar advice that echoed the talk of Hakluyt, Winthrop, and Byrd. Up, sluggard, and waste not life. In the grave will be sleeping enough. So this is a man who by some people's means and understandings, he's a self-made hard worker. And other people's means, what I read in the book and what I understand is Benjamin Franklin had the ability of speech, and his ability to talk allowed him to gain his way into social circles that he may otherwise may have never found himself within. Um, um, I have to read this quote right here once again because this is another one. And let's read about bastards real quick. Let's read about how we know white people created bastards. That is their thing. Leaving children on their own, unattended, defenseless. The woman too. This is what white men have been doing for forever. Listen to this. And in the same way land could be left fallow, human fertility could be wasted. Having no children, wasting their seed, bachelors indulge in the worst kind of reproductive idleness. On the other hand, bastards added to the population and increased the wealth of the empire. Franklin's own circumstances reinforced his view. His son William, later the royal governor of New Jersey, was a bastard. William too fathered a bastard son, William Temple Franklin. And Temple, as he was known, added two known illegitimate to the family tree. Bastards were a Franklin family tradition. Stop. Stop, stop, stop. Are you hearing this? But if I go back to chapter 1 and read to you how they say that the white man was good for nothing but begetting children, fornicating, foraging, and fornicating. So once again, how are these people wasting their seed if all they're doing is fornicating and making babies? Right. Can y'all dig it? It's so ass backwards. This whole concept is backwards. If y'all read this book, you would have had just as hard of a time reading the book as I did. It doesn't make any sense. It makes no sense to say these types of things. Let's go ahead and jump on something that I've read to y'all before. One moment. No, first I'll read this part. In observation, he sought to convince British policymakers that the Caribbean islands should not be the preferred colonial model. Franklin deplored the racial imbalance in the West Indies, which kept the population of laboring whites at artificially low numbers. How can the numbers be artificially low? They wanted to be in low numbers. They wanted to be surrounded by all those black people. They wanted to feel like, we on top and these niggas on bottom. See, Franklin didn't, I'm not gonna say Franklin didn't expose that. This writer of this book, Miss Nancy Isenberg, didn't expose that. However, slave owners who did not perform their own labor suffer from physical defects. How can they say that about slave owners not performing their own labor when many slave owners here, which was the cause of idleness, right? Listen. In short, he concluded that slavery made Englishmen idle and impotent. Hold on, here we go. Franklin also believes slavery taught children the wrong lessons. Which kind of children? White children become proud, disgusted with labor, and being educated in idleness are rendered unfit to get a living by industry. Now, what form of idleness is he talking about? The kind of idleness where you want somebody else to work for you and then you reap all the benefits. That's the idleness he's talking about. Okay? That's the idleness. One second. Now, this is one of the things where I can't stress it enough. Here we go. Poverty was increasingly common in the 18th century as the 18th century wore on. Philadelphia had its economic slumps, brutally cold winter weather, and shortages of woods that caused the poor nearly to freeze to death. In 1784, one man who was part of the working party in the city wrote to the local newspaper that he had 6 children and that he strove in all his power. He could not support them. Hard work by itself was not the magic balm of economic self-sufficiency, nor was Franklin correct that big families was also a boon. He was even wrong about his tabulations on American birth rates. Infant mortality in Philadelphia was surprisingly high and comparable to English rates, proving that Franklin's prediction of a healthy and happy population was more rhetorical than it was demographic fact. The quintessential self-made man was not self-made. The very idea is ludicrous given the inescapable network of patron-client relationships that define the world of Philadelphia. To cushion his rise, Franklin relied on influential patrons who provided contracts and loans that enabled him to acquire the capital he needed to set up his print shop and invest into costly equipment. There we go. That's the proof. That's the proof that if the white gatekeepers don't let your ass in, you're not getting in. It just the white dude with 6 kids who believed the kind of bullshit he was hearing his whole life. As long as I work hard, I'll be all right. Because he listened to what they told him to do. But they needed cannon fodder because you need soldiers. Soldiers don't make themselves. You need breeding to take place to do that. However, we're going to move on. Here we go. Here we go. Here we go. This is bomb. Page 73, final, second to last paragraph. I love it. And then I'm going to go back to page 72 real quick, but this just jumped all on me. Franklin was not sympathetic to the plight of the poor. His design for the Pennsylvania Hospital in 1751 was intended to assist the industrious poor, primarily men with physical injuries. The permanent class of impoverished were not welcome. That mainly includes bastard women and children. However, I'm going to keep it pushing. They were simply shooed over to the almshouse. He felt the English were too charitable, an opinion he based upon observing German settlers in his own colony who worked with greater diligence because they came from a country that offered its poor little in the way of relief. That's because the Germans had little back then. They didn't have much. Once again, this is why they were coming here, because they were poor and they would rather live in land where at least we can turn the land over and actually produce real food, as opposed to like having to go fight with like other small tribes and stuff like that. Anyway, most men wanted a life of ease, Franklin concluded, and freedom from care and labor. Slop in itself, a form of pleasure. Did he call that idleness? Nope, he called it slop. Do y'all understand why that's so big? How can you call slop a form of pleasure, yet at the same time, you have disdain for the poor, those who are idle or you claim are idle? You know what I'm saying? Like, they don't make sense. They don't make sense. Here we go. Oh, here we go. I love it. Franklin proved that he had little faith in human nature. From his early days in Pennsylvania, he fulminated against the intractable poor. In 1731, he wrote a piece in the Pennsylvania Gazette about the scandalous collection of slaves, drunks, and low white servants who gathered at the outdoor fairs. Outdoor fairs, obviously, where people have fairs at and gander about. Now, I want you to understand, what kind of slave would be running around at a fair, having fun? 1731 at that. You know, these are the kind of things that y'all really gotta, man, please. However, here we go. Nope. Here we go. Ha ha! I love this part. To rally support for his militia, he cast the dangers of foreign invasion in terms of class warfare. Who he posed could be expected to lead the attack on civilized people? It would be those licentious privateers, the dregs of society, Negroes, mulattoes, and the others of the vilest and most abandoned of mankind. Wow. Somehow back then in the 1700s, Negroes are already a threat. Already a threat. Once again, y'all have to understand the term Negro, if they're using it synonymous with the African slave, then that means that he could have been talking about Black Native Americans, the Aboriginals, as much as he could have been talking about so-called African slaves. Moving forward. Moving forward. And once again, this is about the American breed, okay? Here we go. Here we go. Here we go. Here we go. I love this. Oh, skip the chapter. Skip into another chapter on accidente. Did not do that on purpose. So let's get to this last page real quick. Franklin's American breed. Nope. Here we go. I can't stop just yet. Can't stop just yet. Middle of the very first paragraph, and no, first paragraph. We're just going to start. For like reasons, he turned a blind eye to slavery. Paine's America was above all else an asylum for future-directed Europeans. No one else need apply. He argued against the inherited notion that America was a dumping ground for lesser humans. It was only a sanctuary for able, hardworking men and women. So once again, this is a guy, Thomas Paine, going against everything that the other people who brought the first Americans here or sent the first Americans here to say. He's like, no, this is not a dumping ground for pieces of shit. This is for people who actually want to have something. Like I said, it gave people an opportunity to change their lives. However, let's just keep going over. This overly sanguine portrait cleaned up class and ignored what was unpleasant to look at. Indentured servitude and convict labor were still very much in evidence as a revolutionary, and slavery was a fact of life. Philadelphia had a slave auction outside the London Coffee House at the center of the town on Front and Market Streets, which was directly across from Paine's lodgings. And common sense, the propagandists mentioned Negroes and Indians solely to discredit them for being mindless pawns of the British when they were incited to harass and kill white Americans and to undermine the worthy cause of independence. Hold on, we got to carry on. The English military had stirred up Indians and Negroes to destroy us against them. Civilized Americans were pitted against the barbarous hordes set upon them by the hellish power of London. Now, does that make any fucking sense to y'all? And I don't mean to get vulgar. Does that make any sense at all to anybody who just heard what I just read? They said that somehow Negroes and Indians had the power to harass and kill folks when Negroes and Indians, Negroes especially, were slaves. So what power did they really have? Number one, unless you're talking about specific Negroes and Indians, these black Indians, who were known for revolting their entire time while they were made slaves. The entirety of certain parts of American colonialism is littered with fighting of certain certain Native American or Aboriginal tribes versus the invading European colonizers. Now, understand, civilized Americans was pitted up. Civilized America was pitted against the barbarous horde set upon them by the hellish power of London. She called these people barbarous on her own admission, on her own damn recognizance. She called them barbarous. And she made sure she quoted Negroes and Indians because the term Negro and the term Indian, depending on who you were talking to back then, were synonymous. Because Indians were black skinned. Thank you very much. I mean, it's huge. It's huge, y'all. It's so big. Here we go, though. Paragraph 2, page 83. For a long time, Great Britain engrossed us, Paine explained, proud to be a part of his adopted home, his American asylum, because he was banished from Britain. The government in London and the Crown was controlling land and resources of the North American continent for selfish purposes. But now the American colonies had to awake to a new reality. The British monopoly had run its course. Now, how could they say that about the British monopoly, right? And she's trying to justify why, once again, dirty ass, ungrateful white people, they're like, we need our own country now. This is ours. Who were the same people as the people who were owning the country. It's crazy. I mean, when I say it's madness, it's absolute madness. It's madness. However, let's just keep carrying on. And advocating for an American breed bent on productivity and expansion, Paine's richly evocative language of waste, idleness, and breeding, and engrossing uh, of land-fed, excitable minds. Knowing his impressionable audience, he compared the coming revolution to Noah and the Great Flood. It would give birth to a race of men, perhaps as numerous as all Europe, their portion of freedom to be passed on to future generations. Population would grow and flourish as long as Americans filled the continent and harvested its resources for export. Now, listen to that. They want to harvest the resources for export. They don't want to build a society that is self-sustained because they don't know how. Thank you very much. Man, y'all really believe these people knew something? Not y'all, but there's a few of us right now who have come in and out, left in and out, who have really thought to think that they knew these people. And let me go ahead and holler at my people. Adrian Smith, Roderick Smith, what up? Hi, Miss Shanika. I don't know who you are, but what up? San Diego, California. Yo, Steven, I put the link in here, bro. Give me about 30 more minutes, 40 more minutes, man, and then we'll hop on to something real quick, bro. We'll hop on something a little different. But I really want to get to, because this is chapter 4, and in this book there's only, let me see, one moment. I want to say like 14 or 15 chapters or something like that. And let me see though. Man. Yeah, I can't even say it's really 14 chapters because, or 13 or 14 chapters, because one of the chapters is the epilogue. And so just anyway, however, let's just move forward. Back to chapter 4, which is still a part of part 1, I want to say. And it's really, I mean, are you guys hearing this stuff? You know what I mean? Like these dudes are dead ass serious. Like these dudes are dead ass serious right now. Like all of them, everything I've been reading to you. And this chick has been taking other people's words, and she has, when I say changed, to not be foul or vulgar to what she's done, but she has totally changed the intended purpose and meaning of some of these men's words. And they're dead now, so they can't defend themselves. But that, it just goes to show you the level of treachery that people are willing to deal in, as far as what they believe. Here we go. Thomas Jefferson's Rubbish. A curious topography of class. By this means, of the best geniuses will be raked from the rubbish annually and be instructed at the public expense so far as the grammar schools go. The circumstance of superior beauty is thought worthy of attention, and the propagation of our horses, dogs, and other domestic animals. Why not in that of man? So what he's saying is that why don't we pour more money into our own people as opposed to looking over them? Here we go. Oh my goodness. I was gonna read big parts of this. I'm gonna go through a lot of his chapter and just kind of just work my way through it. This is probably one of the most offensive chapters in all the book. The only thing I just want to point out again is, I can't skip everything. Here we go. I'm going to read and see where it's picking up. There we go. And then we're going to carry on. So from page 93 to 94. Here we go. Jefferson's idea of topography went beyond the natural environment. He was equally concerned with human chorography, the way humans adapted to the land, exploited its fertility, and built social institutions beyond the rudiments of savagery and barbarism. The American cultivator needed some safeguards. Degeneracy was certainly possible, Jefferson admitted, but not on Buffin's scale. Dangers lurked for Americans who were too close to the wilderness or for those too enamored with commercial luxuries of the old world. In one of his dreamier moments in 1785, he wrote of the hope that America would be like China, completely cut off from European commerce and manufacturing and other entanglements. We should thus avoid all wars, and our citizens would be husbandmen. He wished for a middle zone between the two extremes. Jefferson was not above social engineering, believing that manners could be cultivated. Are you hearing this? Now, let me go back and read something else to you real quick. Notes offered a natural history of race. This is page 92, second paragraph. Notes offered a natural history of race, replete with Jefferson's own empirical observations from facts and figures he had compiled. It was part travel narrative and the tradition of Hakluyt and part legal brief. He imagined the opposing counsel to be acclaimed French naturalist Georges Louis Leclerc, the Comte de Buffon, who had offered up a highly unappealing portrait of the American continent and as a backward place cursed with widespread degeneracy. In notes, the only book Jefferson ever wrote, he stripped away the ugliness and replaced it with a Virginia of natural beauty and bounty. Here in Jefferson's version of the new English Canaan, the English continent promised unmatched resources for commercial wealth. Class was significant. The rich topography afforded a home for his cultivators of the earth. An American breed that represented the world's best hope. Stop right there. These people, once again, are supposed to be cultivators of the land. They never cultivated shit. The only people who ever cultivated land that was worthy of living on are people who owned and had slaves. Facts. Facts. And you can argue whatever you want to. Those are facts, homies. Those are nothing but the cold hard facts. Here we go. Oh, this is crazy. Buffin's Buffin's work was troubling for a number of reasons. In his Histoire naturelle, or natural history, first published in 1749, he had reduced the New World to one giant and nefarious dismal swamp. Is that where they actually got the term dismal swamp from? I want y'all to think about it. All of America, as it were, had become North Carolina. All of America, as it were, had become North Carolina. Can you dig it? But South Carolina was supposed to be the worst place to live. It was supposed to be the worst place for him to be. These are epically amazing things. This is why I'm reading it to you, because I remember this stuff as I bring it up. As I read it, I can remember to point it out. However, here we go. A suffocating mixture of moisture and heat had produced stagnant waters, gross herbage, and miasmas of the air, which retarded the size and diversity of species. Buffin sounded at times like the colorful William Byrd, complaining the noxious exhalations in America that blocked the sun, which made it impossible to purify the soil and the air. Swamp creatures multiplied in this environment. Moist plants, reptiles, and insects, and all animals that wallow in the mire. Domestic animals shrank in size in comparison to their European counterparts, and their flesh was less flavorful. Who dictated that? Who dictated that? Like, who said that they didn't taste as good, and then who then would go on to say that they were smaller in size? Which specific animals? And then what would be the diet of the animals in said England as opposed to these other animals? Mind the fact that these people were just 100 years from the Industrial Revolution and totally, when I say totally, polluting their own way of life and polluting the air and the water and all that. How could they say that about a place like America? It makes no sense. Once again, certain people couldn't have got land, large tracts of desirable land, and the other people have gotten smaller tracts when they're trying to say that certain parts of the land were totally indistinguishable from another. The problem with Virginia and North Carolina for a long time was because they didn't know the dividing line. So if Virginia had fertile lands, that means that North Carolina had fertile lands. Right. This stuff is inconceivable for anybody to have read a book like this and to not put together the facts that another person has presented. She can't present the facts simply as, well, this is just information, because it's meant to be read congruently together. However, here we go. This is another thing. It says only Carolina's prized critter, the hog, thrived in such a godforsaken terrain. But if we were to go back and read again, right, that these people were eating swine and they contracted the yas and their symptoms matched those of syphilis because they were eating swine. Well, what do you think the hog is? It's, once again, it's a play on words, y'all. It's a play on words. It's a play on words. The other animals were probably their natural size, the size they're supposed to be. And because the English may have been feeding these animals unnormal things or things outside of their natural diets, they may have become larger in size. Once again, different breeds of the same species of animals also can do that. However, I'm not going to get carried away with all that. Just keep on reading. 1 second. Let me see if I can't find something else about black slaves. So check this out. As opposed to calling the Native American savages Buffon, right? Says instead, Native Americans existed in an uncultivated state. He admitted yet that they were endowed with a manly ardor and displayed a noble mind. America was not plagued with the pathetic stock of animals or people. On the contrary, the young continent heralded one of the greatest scientific discoveries of the age. The bones of the woolly mammoth, ranked as the largest species known to man, which, according to Jefferson, still roamed the forest. We weren't around back then. How do we know that they didn't roam the forest in the 1700s, y'all? We have to really understand why history is so important. It's a huge thing, direly important. This is their version of history. Here we go. This is crazy. European Americans, not Native Americans. See, they even know the differences in those little things. However, keep it pushing. Euro Americans upon an inbred strength passed down, were equally adaptable to the congenial American environment. They drew upon an inbred strength, passed down from generations of ancestors who had labored in the fields. Bullshit. Once again, how can these people be poor laborers or be dispensed to laziness and idleness? And then once again, in the veins of these people, be the blood of hardworking people who have been called anything but hardworking. Doesn't even make sense. Right. Cultivation was in their blood. Jefferson was saying, and they were already engaged in transforming the land and making it their own. Really. Now, while we're reading, we don't hear about the massive slaughter of Native Americans. We don't hear about the fact that this is theft on every term and level. And if people who felt like, let's say right now, I feel like as a black man, I'm smarter than any white person I've ever met, and all black people that look like me should enslave their asses because we're superior to them mentally, physically, physically, emotionally, and spiritually. In all ways, we're far superior to these people. And so now we're going to do to them what they did to us. Do you think that they would just let that happen? Right. Once again, these are the kinds of things that you have to think about. And for a woman, and I have no issues with women sharing their opinion, but for a woman who I read to you said that a man is the reason why this book is so good. The same man, once again, who helped her write every other book that she wrote. You have to really see where I'm coming from. Is I don't believe that this is her. No, this isn't her book. This is not her book. This book is not hers. This book is the white man's book. If a white man had put the same terms like mulattoes all in this book like this, oh, this shit would have never went down. Never. There's no way. There's no way it would have ever been this widely accepted by white America. Because white men have certain sensitivities to other white men being what people call racist. They really do. Because they don't want to get lumped together like that, even if he's a straight up bigot. Sometimes they would rather you just not know, because they feel like that's their power. They feel like that's the one up they have on you, is you not knowing that really I hate your black ass, even though they have mixed children and everything. So once again, I'm always going to contend something that I learned watching a video from Miss Cynthia G, and some guy who stopped swirling or whatever, some guy who stopped blood mixing, and pretty much one of the reasons was the chick doesn't really love you. I mean, the chick only loves you. She doesn't love your people. You know what I'm saying? So like, how can you be with somebody who doesn't actually love your people? Right, that doesn't make any sense. It goes against logic on so many different levels. And I had people trying to explain to me how love somehow overruled all that. It's the stupidest shit I ever heard. Anyway, let me keep on pushing. Let me keep on pushing. Daniel Shays. Daniel Shays is a mulatto. Can you dig it? I'm gonna look for this part on the internet real quick and see if I can't shed it. No, yeah, she is just a puppet. You know what I'm saying? Yeah, it is that good old Paul Double Talk, but Double Talk he didn't invent. He's just one knucklehead. Let me see if I can't find this this link real quick, y'all. Give me 1 second, please. And then this stuff is just so interesting. Because we have these people who they believe so differently. We have people who they'll tell you differently right now to your face. So it's like, how much of it am I supposed to really, take serious? I want to take it all serious. But I know that's just not smart. I know it's not smart. I'm going to make this bigger real quick so that way we all can see it on the page. I'm going to share my screen real fast. Daniel Shays was a mulatto, but I'm going to show it to you first so that way there's no misunderstandings. Okay. Here we are. Descriptive list of men raised to reinforce the Continental Army for the term of 6 months, agreeable to resolve of June 5, 1780. Returned as received of Justin Ely, Commissioner by Brigadier General John Glover at Springfield, July 10, 1780. At 17 years, stature 5'17", at stature 5 feet and 7 inches, engaged for town of Marshfield, arrived at Springfield, July 9, 1780. There we go. I don't know why I said 1980. I'm tripping. Marched to camp July 10, 1780. Under the command of Captain Daniel Shays, reported a mulatto. Now understand, this guy himself is a mulatto. This is why the mulatto reports to this dude. Understand me. Understand me. This dude, and I can't go too far up, because a lot of these, they don't want to talk about it. You see what I'm saying? They don't really want to talk about it. But you're not taking in mulatto people if one of the early contingents for this through Benjamin Franklin was to not allow mulattoes into the ranks. Listen, I want y'all to think about this. Way before this dude, Ben Franklin, all these guys are like, we can't let mixed race people become a part of our militias. They can't get into our armies or nothing. Why would Benjamin Franklin say that Negroes and mulattoes are a threat to the fucking system? And yet this guy has a mulatto under his charge for only one reason. He's a mulatto. For only one reason, and that reason only. And do they want to say that? No. You know what I'm saying? It's a very unfortunate circumstance that we live in. But it says listen, hold on. Daniel Shays is one of the few people who never allowed a self-portrait to be made of him. You know why? Because he was fucking mixed. His daddy was an Irish guy. His mother more than likely was a black native or something like that, or a black woman. Doesn't really matter. She was black. He had yellow skin, okay, and did not have all the way straight hair. They attempt now once again to clean up history. History's been cleaned up really nice, y'all. They don't go over the fact that Abraham Lincoln was when he was running for senator, they ran a smear campaign against him, claiming that he was part Negro. Now, why this is so important is because in this book, she never points that out. She points out the fact that they call him a cracker, backwood, and all that. And being considered a cracker was an implication that you might be of mixed blood. Why is that never broken down to anybody? Why is that never said? Yet they want you to believe that the cracker is just a punk-ass white person. Or even worse, the cracker was the person who used to beat the slaves, and the cracking of the whip is the sound, and the whip made the crack sound, and this is where the slaves get the term cracker. Right? They tell you all kinds of stuff. However, let's not get too carried away with that. Let's get back to the book. Daniel Shays. One moment. It says Shays had acquired over 200 acres of land, only to see half of his holdings lost during the post-war depression. So that means that the government was just taking people's land and selling it. Just taking people's shit and selling it. Once again, what initiative would a white man, let alone any other man, have to want to cultivate the land just for the government to take it and be like, oh, we need that now. That's prime land. Even though you've done all the hard work to make it prime land. Right. It doesn't make any sense. It's totally goes against all logic and any other effort of thinking. Here we go. Jefferson calculated how a black slave could turn white once a slave possessed 7/8 white blood. The taint of his or her African past was deemed gone. It was more than a theory. Jefferson was practicing race mixing under his own roof, fathering several children with his quadroon slave, Sally Hemings. Her mother, Elizabeth, half white, and her father, John Wales, right on. Listen, if John Wales is her daddy, that's a white man, and her mother was half white. Guess what? She's a quarter. And she called the lady a quadroon. You know how fucking racist that is? Once again, these are the people who will claim and tell you that they worked and built this country, yet will tell you all about idleness all at once. How can they be a forgotten class of people when they never did shit for nothing? Right. It doesn't marry up. It doesn't make sense. Okay. One moment. We're going to work our way into one more chapter. Chapter 5. And we're going to stop once we get to the end of this chapter. Andrew Jackson's Cracker Country. The common man. Absquatulate to mosey or to abscond. No. And so absquatulate to mosey or to abscond. That's the word. 1830. That's the Salem Gazette. By 1800, 1/5 of the American population had resettled on its frontier, the territory between the Appalachian Mountains and the Mississippi. Effective regulation of mass migration was well beyond the limited powers of the federal government. Even so, officials understood that the country's future depended on controlling this vast territory. Financial matters were involved too. Government sale of these lands was needed to reduce the nation's war debt. Besides, the lands were hardly empty. The potential for violent conflicts with Native Americans was ever present. Stop. This is one of the only times in the whole book they actually talk about Native Americans and them beefing with the natives. Any other time, she tries to make it seem like they're all lottie fucking da with the natives. This is the kind of shit I'm talking about. Okay? It's not until 1800, hundreds of years after they've already been here, that she's willing to address the issue with the Native Americans. Okay? Here we go. Let's keep it pushing. Here we go. The image of the typical poor white resident of the frontier was pathetic and striking to observers, but it wasn't new at all. He was an updated version of William Byrd's lazy lubber. He was the English vagrant wandering the countryside. If anything about him was new, was that some observers granted him a folksy appeal. Though coarse and ragged in his dress and manners, the post-revolutionary backwoodsman was at times described as hospitable and generous, and someone who invited weary travelers into his humble cabin. Yet his more favorable cast rarely lasted after the woods were cut down and settled towns and farms appeared. As civilization approached, they call putting up buildings, erecting buildings, civilizations, y'all. As civilization approached, the backwoodsman was expected to lay down roots, purchase land, and adjust his savage ways to polite society or move on. Now, the reason why this is so huge is what money is he going to purchase the land with if he's a lazy piece of shit? Right. It's just, I don't get it, y'all. I don't get it. Whereas Franklin, Payne, and Jefferson envisioned Americans as a commercial people suited to a grand continent, To those who wrote about the American breed during the 19th century, conceived a different frontier character. This new generation of social commentators paid particular attention to a peculiar class of people living in the thickly forested Northwest Territory, Ohio, Illinois, Indiana, Michigan, and Wisconsin. Along the marshy shores of the Mississippi and amid the mountainous terrain and sandy barrens of the southern back country, Western Virginia, the Carolinas, Georgia, plus the new states of Kentucky and Tennessee and Northern Alabama, and the later Florida, Arkansas, and Missouri territories. Damn, she pretty much named every fucking state there was. Like, this is where they're all at. They're everywhere. They're all over. Why didn't she just say that? You see what I'm saying? She explained all these different locations. The only place they weren't at yet was completely back west. That's because the Louisiana Purchase, right on, has to go through, and then then there has to be people that actually go back and then worry about expansion. However, we're gonna move forward, skipping all the way down to the last paragraph. The presumptive new man of the squatter's frontier embodied the best and worst of American character. The Adam, whoo, what a blasphemous term. The Adam of the American wilderness had a split personality. He was a half-hearty rustic and half-Dirk carrying highwayman, excuse me. Meant to be an asshole on that one. I'm sorry. We won't even get carried away with it. What she's trying to say is half of this guy is a good person, right? Really down to earth. The other half of them is somebody who's got like a shadowy part to them. Really evil, corrupt. This unwholesome type lived a brute existence in a dingy cabin, with the yelping dogs at his heels, a haggard wife, and a mongrel brood of brown and yellow brats to complete the sorry scene. A mongrel brood of brown and yellow brats to complete the sorry scene. How can your babies be yellow or brown if you're not blood mixing? Riddle me that, Batman and Batwoman. I don't even want to keep reading this chapter. This chapter pisses me off more than almost any of them. This one pisses me off. Here we go. I'll read the origin of the cracker, and then I'm gonna try to get to the rest of this chapter as best I can. The origin of cracker is no less curious than squatter. The cracking traders of the 1760s were described as noisy braggarts, prone to lying and vulgarity. One who could also crack a jest, and a crude Englishman cracked wind. Firecrackers gave off a stench and were loud and disruptive as they snapped, crackled, and popped. Louse cracker referred to a lice-ridden, sloven, nasty fellow. What about the cracker of the whip? What about that cracker? See what I'm saying? See what I'm saying? You see? You feel me? Like, that's how they do the shit. Another significant linguistic connection to the popular term was the adjective crack brain, which denoted a crazy person who was the English slang for a fool or idle head. Idleness in mind and body was a defining trait. In one of the most widely read 16th century tracts of husbandry, listen, 16th century, she goes all the way back to the 1700s, when we're supposed to be in the 1800s. 2 good haymakers worth 20 crackers. As the embodiment of waste persons, they whittled away time, producing only bluster and nonsense. American crackers were aggressive. Their delight in cruelty meant that they were not just cantankerous, but dangerous. As lawless rascals of the frontier, they had a lean and mean physique, like any inferior animal. Wow! Wow! Can you dig it? Carrying on. Like, backwood traders were easily compared to a rascally herd of deer. Rascal, a yet another synonym for the word trash. Well, it was to them. It was. I'm not saying that's what it means to me or what I think it means. Definitively. I'm just reading what the book has. As scavengers, crackers were feisty and volatile, or they could play the fool like birds, slow-witted lovers. Lovers. Right. So understand, these are people who were playing the part. If they wanted to be hospitable, they could be hospitable. They didn't want to be hospitable, they weren't about to be. That's simple. And for some odd reason, they had brown and yellow brats running around, mongrels. Don't forget that. The persistence of the squatter and crackers allows us to understand how much more limited social mobility was along the frontier than loving legging has it, than loving legend has it. Bullshit. Bullshit. You can't talk about idleness and then talk about these people as if they're different. You see what I'm saying? You can't talk about husbandry as if these people have in their blood the ability to cultivate the land, yet they choose not to. It goes against logic. It goes against any form of decency. Now, Andrew Jackson is considered a cracker. Okay? Now, why this is important, because I'm going to find some stuff about Rachel Jackson, if I can, real quick. And y'all gonna be, man, y'all gonna be surprised, man. You know, here we go. Let's talk about Davy Crockett in a moment. We'll get to his punk ass. But let's just read the Hoosier's Nest. Sexual behavior was another crucial marker of class status and a well-known poem of the era. The Hoosier's Nest. The author hearkened back to the vocabulary of Scottish naturalist Wilson. Here again, the cabins were wild nests, a half-human, half-animal retreat, perfect for indiscriminate breeding. Using a racially charged slur, the poet identified the children as Hoosieroons, a class variation of mixed-race quadroons. Under their leaky roofs were none of the hardy pioneer stock. Instead, poor Indiana squatters produced a degenerate dozen of dirty, yellow urchins. I can't stress this enough. Mind you, while she's talking about crackers right now, right, she doesn't go into these people having pellagra or hookworm as to why they have yellow skin. She uses that as an excuse later, but I already read to you the mongrels, his brood of mongrels of brown and yellow brats. Don't fucking play with me, okay? Give me 1 second, because I gotta bust this shit open about Rachel Jackson. They called her a black wench. 1 second. Let me read something to you. In Crockett's backcountry class hierarchy, there was the free white male landowner, the squatter, the black man, the dog, and then if his language was to be taken serious, the party man, and he meant the political man. This is huge. All this stuff is very, very important. All of it. Um, Now understand, Davy Crockett and Andrew Jackson have a stormy relationship. But a lot of the stormy relationships for Andrew Jackson has to do with the fact that his wife was another man's woman at first, and she was a black Indian who smoked tobacco. Word is bond. Word is bond. You would not. Why would they consider this dude's wife a black wench if she wasn't black and not just call her a wench? Come on, man. 1 second. 1 second. And how I know that she's a black Indian? Because it brings up Rachel Jackson on one of the moments right before he goes and like Andrew Jackson is fighting with Native Americans. You see what I'm saying? All this stuff is just really, 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 really. How do I put it? If you let her tell it, only if you let her tell it, some of these things are totally disconnected from one another, and they're not related. You, but y'all got to listen to what I'm saying, though. Here we go. Let me read this real quick. No, 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 no. I'm not going to read that either. Here we go. We'll read this quote, page 125, and it's a quote from somebody. Who is it? It's a dialogue of the backwoodsman and the dandy, Joseph Drudge, and this is how he sums up what he's seen. A backwoodsman is a queer sort of fellow. If he's not a man of learning, which is learning, he has plain good scent. If his dress is not fine, his inside works are good, and his heart is sound. If he is not rich nor or great, he knows that he is the father of his country. You little dandies and other big folk may freely enjoy the fruits of our hardships. You may feast where we had to starve and frolic where we had to fight. But at the peril of all of you, the backwoodsmen, excuse me, but at the peril of all of you, give the backwoodsmen none of your slack jaw. So pretty much, he's saying the backwoodsmen did all the hard shit. They fought the natives. They took the land. Y'all took the land from the backwoodsmen. The backwoodsman said that's fine because we don't have nothing because at least we know where we stand. And he said, don't be talking no shit. That's what slackjaw is. Shit talking. We're going to keep it pushing and move on. Once I'm done with this chapter, I'm gonna most definitely and it's almost done right now. It is this is huge. One second. In the end, second paragraph of page 131. In the end, the cracker or squatter never resolved his paradoxical character. He could free himself of responsibility, take to the road, and start over. He could boast and brag and pelt anyone who dared to insult his favorite candidate. As many have pointed out, whiskey drinking at the polls was often more important than listening to long-winded speeches. So while some journalists defended the country crackers as the bone and sinew of the countries, others continue to see the cracker as a drunken fool, as one writer put it, elevated a favorite stump speaker into a demigod of the beggars. As late as 1842, squatter was still considered a term denoting infamy of life or station of lesser rank than the class-neutral settler. Settlers and squatters are all the same. She, once again, is using language to her advantage. You understand? Depends on who they were to the people. If you had prime land and and the government wanted to take your land from you, right? And you were unwilling to sell the land, you were a squatter now, okay? If you had prime land and the government wanted to buy your land from you and you sold it, now you're a settler. You understand? That's how it works. It's easy to do that to people. Once again, 1 second. Show. I'm just not getting back to the little comment thing, so I'm just not seeing some of it. See, but, bro, it's not as funny. It's not as funny as we think it is, though, bro. Because we have to understand. Back then, there were still runaway slaves. And when you're thinking about mixed people, bro, you have to take into consideration all the pictures I've showed you. What kind of black people is she talking about? That makes, that makes all the difference in the world. One second. I mean, once again, when somebody says something like nothing had changed in his life of the squatter, in the life of the squatter, nor his drudge, nor for his drudge of a wife, and his brood of dirty, shoeless brats. No problem, bro. I'm just saying. This is just one of those things. And this is part 2 of the book going into. I'm not gonna start it, but it's pedigree and poor white trash, bad blood, half breeds, and clay eaters is the next one. And I'll probably do live streams all this week. So I'll do a live stream tomorrow more than likely, and I'll probably do another one on Tuesday because I want these to all come consecutively, come consecutively together. I can't stress this enough. In the chapter after this, chapter 6, following chapter 5, you're gonna hear me compare a lot of the times how people who were eating dirt, $9.99 on the internet. Amazon has it. A lot of places has it. But she speaks on people becoming dirt eaters, clay eaters, and them contracting this sickness called pellagra or hookworm. And sometimes it would cause the yellowing of their skin, much like jaundice does, right? No problem, big bro. And I guess what I'm trying to say is that this is a real review, okay? This is a real review. I was going to play the interview, but now I don't want to play the interview. I would rather you guys just go to my channel, Love Is Not a Game, and then watch it yourself, and then just continue to listen to the things that I'm going to say, because she is a cherry picker, she chooses which specific narratives of history to use to support her point. But while using these specific narratives, she is also juxtapose herself in many senses. I'm not inclined to say that the book is complete garbage. I'm not inclined to say that. I am inclined to say, though, however, that the book is it should be read with careful eyes, and you should most definitely take a grain of celery salt with this one, because regular salt might not do. I'm gonna end this. Hey Tammy, hey, how you doing, sister? I'm about to end this right here, and then I'm gonna just do a regular live stream where we can, so that way I can engage you guys and talk, because I don't want the reviews to become more of expounds. So with that, we're just gonna just capsize the first 5 chapters real fast. First and foremost, waste people. Though the terms considerably change from waste people to white trash, lubber, whatever, right? Cracker, squatter, whatever they want to say. These terms have to be looked at in the term of that's regular white folk to them. These aren't you can't really separate the classes of white people that come here unless they were actually rich already or they were poor. One of the things I didn't break into when I read chapter 2 was they were giving swaths of land to these people we're talking 50, 60 acres at a time to people. Sometimes people were getting as much as 500 acres at a time. That's the most that they would allot to a person. So understand, these guys had acres. Okay, sister, I'm glad. Right on. Uh, they have this. They give this mentality that these people just came on here and there was no one living on the land. There were Native Americans living on the land, Aboriginals living on the land. Okay, and because these things are once again overlooked, and no, either way, they got a head start. No matter how you look at their history, they had a head start. They didn't come here as slaves. You see? How you doing, Sister Thomas? They didn't come here as slaves. Even the ones who were indentured servants, I didn't go over in the book how the book says these white indentured servants were prone to running away and leaving. Prone to it. Prone to leave, prone to running away. Okay? It goes on to explain how black slaves were prone to running away. But why would you not be prone to wanting to get free? There was something wrong with slaves for wanting to be free. You see what I'm saying? You know, and so this is just one of those things. I'm glad you're doing great, sister. I'm glad to hear it. Chapter 3, 4, and 5. You know, man, you could almost say they're the same chapters because you got Jefferson's rubbish, then you have Franklin's American Breed, right? And then you have what is it? Jackson's Cracker Country. The reason why they're almost all the same because she doesn't leave a specific diaspora of time, and she tries to connect the earliest settlers to settlers who at the time probably owned slaves, actually had land, and were just lazy, all out lazy. Don't you guys find it just slightly amazing that she called this dude's children his brood of Mongol brown and yellow brats? His brood of brown, and it's just crazy. Like, how do you talk to somebody like that? So this is where we're at, y'all. The first 5 chapters are to try to explain the conditions as to why the white man is so damn lazy. But the white man is lazy because he came here lazy. Once again, you can't be people who are seeking to escape financial persecution out of England and then at the same time be considered a person who's idle. That doesn't make any sense. How can you be lazy as fuck and hold on, you're seeking to escape financial persecution. You're seeking to escape poverty. It makes no sense. It makes no sense at all. You know what it sounds like to me, right? It sounds like they put a bunch of poor ass white people on boats and just forcibly sent them here. Because they were forcibly sent here. Well, we see how white people act when they get forced to do anything. They're not having that. However, this has been part 1 of what I believe will be 3 or 4 parts of the White Trash Review. I've had a great time doing this. This next one, I'm going to attempt to incorporate more pictures, but I can't. No. Listen, though, Tammy, they sent criminals here, too. This book explains how they sent criminals to America also. How do you guys think they fought the Aboriginals and the Native Americans? They fought them with their own scalawags. They fought fire with fire. That's how they did it. That's how they took the land over. That's why the fighting and the killing and the maiming of Native Americans is not mentioned in this book wholesale. The white woman's affinity towards the black man is not mentioned wholesale. Uh, there's many things that aren't mentioned wholesale. But I'm about to end this. I'm about to end this live stream. I'm gonna redo, and then I'm gonna start another one right after, and it's gonna be to show you guys where I'm at with my Eskimo Joe thing, and then hopefully things from there are becoming more clear. One moment. So I'm about to end this. I'm done. I'm gonna restart another live stream almost ASAP. So just look for it, and then we'll do that for a couple hours and kick it and just talk. All right, y'all. Thank you for your time. Peace.